Sergeant Major Jack Thompson's rifle barked, and an alien skull exploded in a spray of green ichor. One down, only 799 more binars to go. The dim lights of the space station bar glinted off Thompson's glass of whiskey as a fresh-faced private slid into the booth across from him. "Oh, you're the Jack Thompson, right? The hero of Zeta 9? Private Bobby Harris asked, eyes wide. Thompson just grunted and took another swig. Harris leaned forward, eager. "I heard you held off an entire Binar invasion force alone. 800,000 aliens against just you. And you lived to tell about it. How? You got to tell me everything." Thompson fixed Harris with a cold stare. The kid wanted a story, did he? Fine, he'd give him a story. Zeta 9 was supposed to be just another routine deployment, a quick smackdown of a few border skirmishers, Thompson began, his gravelly voice low. Worst case, maybe 10,000 binars. Nothing we couldn't handle. Thompson drained his whiskey and signaled the bartender for another. But intel fucked up. When that Binar fleet dropped out of hyperspace, we were facing 800,000 of the insectoid bastards, 200 of us humans against 800 goddamn thousand. Orders came down from on high. Hold the line at any cost. Buy time for the colonies to evacuate. Civilians came first, then the fleet, the pencil pushers said. If any of us grunts survived, great. If not... Thompson shrugged. Suicide mission. But if we failed, millions would die. Outpost Zeta 9 was the only thing standing between 800,000 binars and the soft, fleshy underbelly of a dozen human worlds. The private gulped audibly. So what did you do? Thompson smiled coldly. What any human soldier would do when the odds are 4,000 to 1 against. We dug in and prepared to give those alien fuckers the worst day of their short lives. Thompson pauses to take a swig of whiskey, the memories of that fateful day flooding back. He sets the glass down with a heavy thunk and continues his haunting tale. They came out of nowhere. 1 minute the sky was clear, the next it was filled with their ships blotting out the stars. Swarms of sleek black vessels that seemed to suck in all the light around them. We watched, horrified, as they descended on the outpost. Their landing craft disgorged endless hordes of Binar warriors, all clicking mandibles and gleaming chitin. Harris listens, enraptured and horrified as Thompson recounts the early stages of the battle. We fought like hell from the start, poured everything we had into their ranks. Plasma rifles, grenades, flamethrowers we jury-rigged from scrap. We mowed down scores of the bastards, but it didn't matter. For everyone we killed, 10 more poured out of those ships. Thompson's eyes go distant, seeing not the dingy bar but the blood-soaked corridors of Outpost Zeta 9. He falls silent for a long moment, jaw clenched. When he speaks again, his voice is strained. 3 days in, they breached the command center. That's when I saw him, Xanth, their leader. He towered over the other Binars, all spikes and gleaming armor. His eyes burned into you like he could see right through to your soul, and he was coming right at me, scything down my men like they were nothing but chaff in the wind. Thompson's eyes flash with a fierce light as he recounts the desperate battle with Xanth, his voice growing more intense with each word. We clashed in the heart of the command center, surrounded by sparking consoles and shattered displays. Xanth's strength was monstrous, his speed unnatural. Every blow felt like being hit by a wrecking ball. But I had something he didn't: human tenacity, the will to never give up no matter the odds. Thompson describes the brutal hand-to-hand combat that followed, the two warriors trading blows that cracked reinforced concrete. I fought with everything I had, drawing on every scrap of training and experience. I used every dirty trick in the book, every desperate tactic I could think of. I smashed his face with my rifle butt, gouged at his eyes, tried to find a weak spot in his armor. But Xanth was relentless, shrugging off wounds that would have killed a lesser creature. He just kept coming, a juggernaut of chitin and hate. The old soldier pauses, taking a deep swig of his whiskey before continuing. His voice drops to a whisper. I was losing, and I knew it. Xanth was too strong, too fast. I couldn't beat him, not head-on. But there was one thing I could do, one final desperate gambit. Thompson reveals how he managed to gain the upper hand, luring Xanth into a trap he had prepared earlier. I led him into the reactor room, taunting him, goading him to follow. I had rigged the coolant systems to blow, overriding the safeties. It was going to be a one-way trip, but I was ready to make that sacrifice. For humanity, for the colonies, for the men and women I'd fought beside. He describes the moment of truth, the final confrontation in the heart of the reactor. I let Xanth corner me, let him think he had me beaten, and when he lunged in for the kill, I dodged aside. His claw struck the reactor core, piercing the shielding, and then everything went white. Thompson's voice trembles slightly as he relives the memory. The explosion was indescribable, a searing, blinding flash of heat and light that seemed to consume everything. The force of it slammed into me like the fist of an angry god, hurling me back. The last thing I remember is the sound of Xanth's scream, an unholy shriek of rage and pain as the flames engulfed him. The old soldier falls silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, haunted by the ghosts of the past. When he speaks again, his voice is heavy with emotion. I should have died that day. By all rights, I should have been vaporized along with Xanth, but somehow through some miracle or fluke I survived, battered, broken, but alive. When the Binars saw their leader fall, saw the reactor go critical, they faltered. Without Xanth's iron will driving them on, they fell into disarray, their coordination shattered. It was the turning point we needed, the one chance in a million to turn the tide. Thompson leans forward, fixing the wide-eyed private with an intense stare. That's the thing about us humans, kid. We don't know when to quit. Even when the odds are insurmountable, when all hope seems lost, we keep fighting. We'll sacrifice everything, even our own lives, to protect what matters. That's what I learned on Zeta 9. That's what Xanth and his Binar horde learned in the end. The old soldier settles back in his seat, a grim smile playing about his lips. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. There were still thousands of Binars out there. Thompson's voice grows rough with emotion as he picks up the thread of his tale. When I came to in the rubble of the reactor room, surrounded by the smouldering corpses of Binars, I thought it was over. Thought I'd finally punched my ticket to hell. But then I heard it, the sound of gunfire echoing through the ruined halls of the outpost. My boys were still fighting. I dragged myself out of the wreckage, every movement agony, found a rifle on a dead Binar, and forced myself onwards towards the sound of battle. What I saw, it lit a fire in me, even through the pain. Thompson describes the scene as he limped into the shattered command center. The few remaining human soldiers, bloodied and battered, rallying for one last stand. They fought like demons, possessed by a fury I'd never seen, blasting away at the Binars, pouring through the breaches, even as their numbers dwindled. They'd seen me fall, seen the explosion that took out Xanth. They thought I was dead. But seeing me stagger out of the smoke, it was like a jolt of lightning to their veins. He recounts how the tide slowly turned, the humans forcing the Binars back foot by bloody foot. We retook the command center at a hellish cost, leaving it piled high with Binar dead. But it gave us access to the outpost's defense grid, automated turrets, sentry guns, the works. We turned them on the bugs, mowed down their ranks like wheat at harvest time. Thompson's voice grows harder, a glint of grim satisfaction in his eye. But the real masterstroke, that was when we used the outpost's sensor array to broadcast a fake signal, making it seem like a whole human battle fleet was about to drop out of hyperspace. The Binars bought it hook, line, and sinker. They came swarming down to finish us off before the reinforcements arrived. What they didn't know was that we'd rigged the outpost's reactor to blow, suckered them into landing their troop ships right on top of it. The explosion... Thompson shakes his head, marveling at the memory. It was like the birth of a new sun, a blast of pure, cleansing fire that swept across the landing field, engulfing the Binar ships, the troops still disembarking. It was a slaughter, their fleet decimated in an instant, the ground forces cut off and surrounded. We hunted them through the ruins until none were left, purging them like the vermin they were. Less than 50 of us survived that final hellish day, 50 out of the thousands we started with, but we'd done it. Against odds that would make the devil himself flinch, we held the line, bought time for the colonies to evacuate, and we made sure the Binars paid for every inch, every life. He drains the last of his whiskey, slamming the glass down. That's the lesson of Zeta 9, kid. When the odds are impossible, when all hope is lost, that's when humanity shines brightest. That's when we show the universe what we're made of. And God help any sorry bastard that tries to stand in our way. As Thompson pauses to collect his thoughts, Harris leans forward, eager to hear more. What happened next, Sarge? How did you make it back to friendly space? Thompson chuckles, a glint of pride in his eye. That's where things got interesting, kid. See, the Binars had knocked out our long-range comms during the initial assault. We had no way to contact Fleet Command, no way to let them know we had survived. He takes a swig of his whiskey, the ice cubes clinking against the glass. We were on our own, cut off and deep in enemy territory, but we weren't about to just roll over and die. Not after everything we'd been through. Thompson describes how the remaining human soldiers, battered and weary, set about repairing the outpost's damaged systems. We cannibalized parts from the wrecked ships, jury-rigged what we could. It wasn't pretty, but we managed to get a distress beacon operational. He shakes his head, a rueful smile on his lips. But we knew it was a long shot. The nearest friendly outpost was weeks away, and the Binars were sure to be looking for us. We had to assume that any signal we sent would be intercepted. Thompson reveals how the humans, faced with dwindling supplies and the constant threat of Binar reinforcements, hatched a daring plan. We knew we couldn't stay put, but we also knew we couldn't outrun the Binars in our current state. So we decided to take the fight to them. His eyes glint with a fierce light as he recounts the audacious scheme. We had captured a few of their ships during the battle, along with some of their equipment. We figured, why not use their own tech against them? Thompson describes how the soldiers, disguised in Binar armor and using their ships, launched a series of guerrilla raids on nearby enemy outposts. We hit them hard and fast, striking where they least expected it. We'd swoop in, blast our way into their bases, grab whatever supplies and intel we could, and then get the hell out before they could mount a response. He grins, a savage, predatory expression. We used their own tactics against them. The Binars, they're all about order, discipline, following the chain of command. They never expected a bunch of ragtag humans to be so bold, so unpredictable. Thompson's voice grows animated as he relives those desperate, daring raids. We'd be in and out before they even knew what hit them. Stole food, medical supplies, ammunition, even managed to hack into their comms a few times, gather vital intel on their movements and plans. He leans back, satisfaction etched on his weathered face. The Binars, they were still reeling from their defeat at Zeta 9. They thought they'd finished us off, that we were no longer a threat. They were caught completely off guard by our raids. Thompson takes another sip of whiskey, savoring the burn. For weeks we were the ghosts of Zeta 9, striking fear into the hearts of the Binar forces in the sector. They couldn't predict where we'd hit next, couldn't stop us. We left a trail of destruction and confusion in our wake, even as we gathered the resources we needed to survive. He chuckles darkly, a glint of grim humor in his eye. I imagine we were quite the thorn in their side. The mighty Binar war machine, thrown into disarray by a handful of human survivors who refused to die quietly. It must have driven their commanders mad, trying to stamp us out. Thompson's voice grows reflective, tinged with a hint of melancholy. But we knew it couldn't last forever. Sooner or later the Binars would wise up, bring in reinforcements to hunt us down. We had to find a way to contact our own forces, to let them know we were still alive and fighting. He drains the last of his whiskey, setting the glass down with a heavy thunk. And that, kid, is where the real challenge began, trying to get a signal out through the Binar jamming, across light years of hostile space, to a fleet that probably thought we were long dead. But like I said, we were the survivors of Zeta 9. We didn't know the meaning of impossible. Thompson's gaze grows distant, his mind drifting back to those desperate, danger-filled days. The air seems to thrum with the weight of untold memories, of battles fought and sacrifices made. Harris sits enraptured, scarcely daring to breathe lest he break the spell of the old soldier's tale. In the dim light of the bar, Thompson seems to loom larger than life, a living legend wreathed in the smoke of 1,000 battles. His voice, low and gravelly, carries the weight of history, of a story that demands to be heard. So he had a plan, you see, a last desperate gambit to get word out to call for the help we so sorely needed. But to pull it off, we'd have to take on the Bynars head-on, in the very heart of their stronghold in the sector. Thompson's eyes glitter with a fierce undimmed fire as he leans forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. This is where it gets interesting, kid. This is where the survivors of Zeta 9 took the fight to the enemy, against odds that would make even the bravest soldier quail. And this is where we showed the Bynars, once and for all, what happens when you push humanity to the brink. He settles back in his seat, a grim smile playing about his lips. In the pregnant pause that follows, the air seems to crackle with anticipation, with the promise of a tale that will be etched into the annals of history. For in this moment, in this dingy, nondescript bar on the fringes of civilized space, the legend of Zeta 9 is poised to grow, to take on new life in the telling. And Private Harris, wide-eyed and breathless, is ready to bear witness to the next chapter in this epic saga of human resilience and indomitable will. Sergeant Major Jack Thompson, hero of the Bynar War, survivor of Zeta 9, takes a deep breath, preparing to plunge once more into the heart of the maelstrom, for his tale is not yet done, and the ghosts of Zeta 9 demand their due. Thompson's eyes glitter with a fierce light as he recounts the next phase of their audacious plan. We knew we couldn't keep playing cat and mouse with the Bynars forever. Sooner or later they'd regroup and come down on us like a hammer. We needed an edge, something to tip the scales in our favor. He leans forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. That's when we discovered the chink in their armor. See, the Bynars, for all their discipline and hive-mind unity, weren't as cohesive as we thought. There were cracks in the foundation, rivalries and power struggles bubbling just beneath the surface. Thompson describes how the human survivors, armed with intelligence gleaned from their daring raids, began to exploit these divisions. We intercepted their comms, cracked their encryption, started feeding them misinformation, stoking the flames of their paranoia. We made it look like some factions were secretly collaborating with us, while others were plotting to seize power for themselves. He chuckles darkly, a glint of savage satisfaction in his eye. It was a dangerous game manipulating them like that. But it worked. The Bynars started to turn on each other, accusation and counter-accusation flying like shrapnel. Their chain of command started to fray, their forces becoming scattered and disorganized as they chased phantoms and fought among themselves. Thompson's voice grows distant, his gaze unfocused as he relives those tense, pivotal moments. For a while there, it seemed like we might actually pull it off, the mighty Bynar war machine, brought low by a handful of desperate humans playing mind games from the shadows. It was a thing of beauty in its own twisted way. But then his expression darkens, a shadow passing over his weathered features. We should have known it was too good to last. Just when we thought we had them on the ropes, that's when it all went to hell. He falls silent, his jaw clenching as the memories flood back. In the dim light of the bar, Thompson seems to age before Harris's eyes, the weight of untold horrors etched into every line of his face. The young private leans forward, scarcely daring to breathe. What happened, Sarge? Thompson's gaze snaps back to the present, his eyes boring into Harris with an intensity that makes the younger man flinch. They found us, he says simply, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Somehow, despite all our precautions, all our clever tricks, the Bynars managed to track us down, and they came in force, a tidal wave of chitin and hate crashing down on our little hideaway. He shakes his head, a mirthless smile twisting his lips. All our efforts, all our sacrifices, and in the end it bought us what? A few weeks of borrowed time, a chance to die on our feet instead of our knees. Thompson's hand tightens around his empty glass, his knuckles white with the strain. But we weren't going down without a fight, not after everything we'd been through, everything we'd lost. If the Binars wanted to finish the job, they were going to have to pay for it in blood. His voice drops to a whisper, a promise and a threat rolled into one. And so began the last stand of the ghosts of Zeta 9, the final chapter in a story of defiance and sacrifice that would echo through the ages. A story that I, Sergeant Major Jack Thompson, the last living witness, now pass on to you, Private Harris. Thompson's eyes darken as he recounts the fateful raid, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. We crept into the supply depot, shadows in the night, just like we'd done a dozen times before, but something felt off from the start, a prickling unease that set my teeth on edge. He describes the eerie stillness that greeted them, the usual bustle of Binar activity conspicuously absent. It was too quiet, too easy. We should have known it was a trap, but by the time we realized it was already too late. Suddenly the air erupts with the sizzling hiss of plasma fire, the darkness lit by the eerie glow of Binar weaponry. They came at us from every side, a tide of chitin and hate. We were caught in the open, exposed, with nowhere to run. Thompson's voice trembles slightly as he recounts the brutal battle that followed, the humans fighting with the desperate fury of the doomed. We gave as good as we got, made the bastards pay for every inch, but we were outmatched, plain and simple. He describes the gut-wrenching horror of watching his comrades fall, their cries of pain and defiance echoing in his ears. Jenkins, Sanchez, O'Malley, they went down fighting, taking scores of the bugs with them. But it wasn't enough, could never be enough. He describes the vicious duel that ensued, the two warriors locked in a dance of death amid the flames and wreckage. We fought like demons, blades flashing in the firelight. I was wounded, bleeding, but I refused to fall. I couldn't let him win, not after everything we'd sacrificed. Thompson's eyes glaze over as he recounts the final desperate moments of the battle. I was on my last legs, my strength fading fast. Xanth was toying with me, savoring his victory. That's when fate intervened. He describes the sudden, earth-shattering explosion that rocked the depot, the walls crumbling and collapsing under the onslaught. A stray shot must have hit something volatile, set off a chain reaction. Suddenly, the whole place was coming down around our ears. Thompson's voice is barely audible over the roar of the inferno. Xanth and I were caught in the middle, buried beneath a ton of rubble. I blacked out, certain I was dead, but somehow, against all odds, I survived. He falls silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When I came to, the depot was a smoking ruin. The Binars were gone, scattered or crushed beneath the debris, and Xanth, there was no sign of him. I searched, but never found his body. Thompson looks up, his eyes hard. But I knew in that moment that the tide had turned once more. Xanth was gone, the Binar forces thrown into disarray. We had bought ourselves a chance, slim though it might be. With Xanth vanquished beneath the rubble, for a moment everything was still, save for the ringing in our ears and the pounding of our hearts, Thompson recounts. But we had no time to catch our breath. The Binars were still out there, and they'd be coming for us. Thompson describes the frantic scramble that followed, the survivors regrouping amidst the wreckage. We were bloodied and bruised, our numbers cut down to a mere handful, but we weren't beaten, not by a long shot. We still had fight left in us, and we were going to make sure the Binars felt it. He leans forward, his eyes alight with the memory of that desperate counterattack. We struck out from the ruins like vengeful ghosts, hitting the Binars where they least expected it, their command posts, their comms relays, anything that would throw them off balance. We used their own confusion against them, sowing chaos and discord in their ranks. Thompson's voice is filled with grim pride as he recounts those harrowing raids. We moved like shadows, striking hard and fast before melting away into the darkness. Every Binar we took down, every minute we bought, was another chance for our distress signal to get through, for help to arrive. But even as they fought with renewed determination, Thompson admits that hope was a dwindling commodity. We were running on fumes, fighting on sheer willpower and adrenaline. Deep down, we knew we couldn't hold out forever. The Binars were too many and we were too few. He pauses, his gaze distant as if reliving that moment of darkest despair. Just when it seemed like the end was inevitable, just when the Binars were closing in for the kill, that's when we heard it. A sound that, in that instant, was sweeter than any music. The roar of human battleships, the thunder of friendly guns. Thompson's voice trembles with emotion as he describes the arrival of the 7th Fleet, the disbelief and joy that surged through the survivors. They came screaming out of the sky like avenging angels, all cannons blazing, tearing into the Binar forces with a fury that was breathtaking to behold. In that moment, as I watched our reinforcements pour into the fray, I knew that our prayers had been answered. Against all odds, we had held the line. He sits back, a shadow passing over his face even as he recounts that triumphant moment. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. There was still fighting ahead, a hard slog to clear out the remaining pockets of Binar resistance. But the tide had turned irrevocably. We had weathered the storm, and now it was the Binar's turn to feel the sting of human vengeance. Thompson's voice grows heavy as he reflects on the cost of that victory. We left that rock as heroes, every one of us, but the price we paid was steep. So many good soldiers, so many friends left behind on that God-forsaken planet. But even in our grief, we knew that their sacrifice hadn't been in vain. They had held the line to the last breath and the last bullet. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was made of. Thompson's voice darkens as he recounts the aftermath of the 7th Fleet's arrival and the supposed victory over the Binars. We thought we'd won, that we'd finally broken their backs. With their fleet shattered and their ground forces decimated, surely they couldn't recover from such a blow. He shakes his head, a bitter smile on his lips. How wrong we were. In the weeks that followed, even as we licked our wounds and mourned our dead, reports started coming in from the frontier. New Binar incursions, hit-and-run attacks on our outposts and colonies. It was like they'd never been defeated at all. Thompson's fist clenches on the table. The memories of those dark days still roar. It was a nightmare. Every time we thought we'd stamp them out, they'd pop up somewhere else, stronger and more vicious than before, like fighting a damned hydra. Cut off one head, 2 more take its place. He describes the toll the unending war took on the human forces, the mounting casualties and dwindling resources. We were stretched to the breaking point, trying to plug the gaps, to hold the line, but it was never enough. The Binars just kept coming, wave after endless wave. Thompson's voice grows heavy with the weight of remembrance. Morale was in the gutter. Soldiers who'd once fought with fire in their bellies now looked at each new deployment as a death sentence. We all knew it was only a matter of time before the Binars overran us completely. He leans forward, his eyes glinting with a desperate light. That's when High Command got word of the Queen. Intel had finally pieced together the truth behind the Binars' uncanny coordination, their ability to keep fighting no matter the losses. They were a hive mind controlled by a single central intelligence. Thompson's voice drops to a hushed whisper. The Queen. If we could take her out, disrupt the hive mind, the Binars would fall into disarray. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance we had left. He describes the daring plan that was hatched, the elite team assembled for a mission they called Operation Prometheus. It was fitting, naming it after the Titan who stole fire from the gods, because that's what we were doing, sneaking into the heart of the Binar's power, to strike at their most jealously guarded secret. Thompson reveals how he was chosen to lead the team, to guide them into the belly of the beast. I'd seen the Binars up close, fought them tooth and nail. If anyone could get us in and out again, it was me. But I knew the odds. We all did. It was a one-way trip, a sacrificial run. He looks up, meeting Harris's eyes with an unflinching gaze. But what choice did we have? If we failed, humanity was doomed. This was our last roll of the dice, our final gambit. The Prometheus team would either be our salvation or our epitaph. Thompson falls silent, the weight of the tale hanging in the air. In the dim light of the bar, he seems to retreat into himself, his thoughts far away, lost in the memories of that fateful mission. The silence stretches, pregnant with the untold horrors and triumphs yet to come. Thompson's eyes glaze over as he relives the harrowing final push into the heart of the Bynnar hive. His voice is rough, each word heavy with the weight of memory. We fought through hell itself to reach the Queen's chamber. Bynnar warriors swarmed us from every direction, a relentless tide of claws and chitinous armor. We cut them down, blasted them apart, but they just kept coming. He pauses, his gaze distant, seeing not the dingy bar but the dark, twisting corridors of the alien nest. The air thrums with the echoes of distant screams and the chatter of gunfire. We lost Ramirez to a Bynnar ambush, a dozen of the bugs dropping on him from a hidden tunnel above. He took a score of them with him, fighting to his last breath, and Chen, a Bynnar guardian, got him, impaled him on its wrist blades. He hung there, choking on his own blood as we were forced to leave him behind. Thompson's hands shake as he raises his glass to his lips, the whiskey sloshing against the sides. He drains it in one long pull, slamming the empty glass back onto the table. But we pushed on, inch by blood-soaked inch, until at last we stood before the Queen's chamber. She was waiting for us, this monstrous thing, all pulsing flesh and twisted limbs, her mind pressed against ours, a wave of alien hunger and malice that threatened to drown us in despair. He leans forward, his eyes boring into Harris's own. That's when young Harris, barely more than a kid, stepped forward. He had the charges, the ones we'd hoped to plant at the hive's reactor core. He looked at me, and I saw in his eyes that he knew what had to be done. Thompson's voice cracks, a single tear tracing its way down his weathered cheek. I tried to stop him to take his place, but he wouldn't have it. "This is my duty, Sarge," he said. "My chance to make a difference." And he pushed past me, running towards the Queen, the charges armed and ready. The old soldier's shoulders slump, the weight of that moment bearing down on him like a physical thing. He set the charges at the base of her hideous throne, the Bynnars tearing at him, ripping into his flesh. But he just smiled at me, even as his life bled out onto the hive's pulsing floor. "Go," he whispered. And then the chamber was collapsing, the Queen's shrieks mixing with the thunder of the explosions. We ran, the tunnels disintegrating around us, the Bynnars in chaos without their Queen's guiding presence. We barely made it to the surface before the whole accursed place came down, burying the Queen and her brood under a mountain of rubble. Thompson falls silent, his tale at an end. In the stillness of the bar, the weight of his words hangs heavy, a testament to the horror and heroism of those final, fateful moments in the heart of the enemy's lair. Harris can only sit in stunned silence, his mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what he's heard, of the price paid for humanity's survival. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.